Hey guys, what's going on? Steven back again, and I'm back with another 40K video from Warhammer. Now this is part 1 of 2 because I'm going to split this video up into 2 parts just because the video is so long. It's what, 50 minutes, so yeah, it's pretty long, so this is going to be part 1. Now the title of the video is Top 10 Most Powerful Characters in Warhammer 40K. So this will be a very interesting list for a couple of reasons. Are we including gods, or are we not including gods? Because if we're including gods, well, obviously gods are going to be like the most powerful characters, but you got obviously the Chaos Gods, and is he going to clump Chaos Gods as one, or is he going to split them up individually? If he does that, well, boom, 4 spots gone. So it's like half the list is already gone right there if he splits up, if he does Chaos Gods and splits them up. Then we would have, obviously, the Emperor, so boom, half the list is already gone. Trying to think of what else. See, I don't know what we mean by powerful. Are we going like powerful physical strength, psychic abilities, powerful as just what they've done, like the Silent King bringing all Necron dynasties together and doing the War in Heavens, like that was very powerful. I don't know what what we're going off of as powerful. But yeah, I mean, 4 Chaos Gods, the Emperor, the old ones, even though it didn't end well for them, either way, they still created 2 races, so that's pretty powerful. I mean, you can create an entire race. Avatar Khaine. I don't think any of the Primarchs are on here, despite them all being very powerful. Because, who would you put, on this list? Angron, probably, like, just for example, probably the most physically strongest Primarch. Magnus, most, psychically strong character. So I don't know, what we're basing it off of. So I'm guessing no Primarchs. But yeah, Chaos Gods, Emperor, Old Ones, Avatar Khaine. I'm drawing a blank. Yeah, I don't know for the last 3. Now, if he clumps the Chaos Gods together, well, now that frees up way more spaces. If we're not including gods, well, that would be a very, very different list, because, then you can throw a lot more non-god characters in here, probably like, Dante. I'm drawing a blank on some of these characters, but you can do, other characters and stuff, so we'll have to find out, but, yeah, here we go, part 1 of top 10 most powerful characters, and let's find out who they are. Here we go.
The Warhammer franchise is full of ludicrously powerful characters, and it makes sense, because it seems like just about everything in this universe is designed to kill you in the most horrifying way imaginable. But despite the plethora of transhuman super soldiers, golden demigod guardians, immortal killing machines, and masters of the psychic arts, there are entities that dwell just beyond the stars, that make them all look like ants by comparison. Beings of unimaginable destructive potential that can sunder entire worlds and unleash legions of terrifying armies at a whim. From the dark and sinister Chaos Gods, to the ancient and terrifying Catan, from the Master of Mankind to a pair of bumbling orc deities too busy fighting each other to do much of anything else. These are the top 10 most powerful entities in the entire 40K franchise.
Entities.
And apologies ahead of time if my voice is a little raspy. I'm actually getting over it.
Because I'd say, like,
Alright, with all that out of the way,
Scarbrand was,
let's dive
very powerful and stuff.
Number 10, Cegorach. Cegorach is the
the
Eldari trickster
laughing god, okay.
most commonly associated with the faction known as the Harlequins.
Yeah, okay.
Now, over the years, he has gone by many names, including the Laughing God or the Great Fool. He is one of the only surviving members of the Eldari pantheon, as aside from himself, Khaine the god of war, and Isha the goddess of healing, each of the other deities would be systematically hunted down and murdered by the newborn chaos god Slaanesh. The legend goes that due to his mocking nature and aloof personality, he was able to distance himself from the acts of hedonism and debauchery that would eventually give rise to Slaanesh in the first place. When the Chaos God was born, he escaped into the Webway, where he remained largely unaffected, while the rest of the Pantheon would inevitably be cut down.
Now that's kind of crazy, like right when Slaanesh, arrived, even Eldar gods left. Well, this one did. The others, not so much. But still, that's pretty insane. Like, hey, how you doing? And all of a sudden, other gods just poof.
If you're unfamiliar with the Webway, it's a pocket dimension that exists between universes. Its many paths spider web across the galaxy, allowing those who can parse its secrets to travel great distances without facing the dangers of utilizing the warp for travel. Cegorach is rumored to have picture-perfect knowledge of all of the infinite paths and corridors within the Webway, and he thus imparts that knowledge upon his followers, allowing the Harlequins to seemingly appear and reappear anywhere across the galaxy. Cegorach's power does not necessarily come in the form of brute force, and more so in his guile and ability to manipulate. It was he who tricked the Khaine into devouring their kin, but we'll touch on them a little bit later in this video. Buried deep within the Webway itself is an Eldari craft world known as the Black Library. The Black Library is said to be a repository of all the knowledge the Eldar as a species ever managed to gain into the entities that live within the warp. And thus it is fiercely guarded by the Harlequins. At the center of the Black Library exists a legendary tome that has been locked with spiritual chains since the collapse of the Eldar Empire. However, as we move into the 42nd millennium, those chains have finally been broken. Supposedly, the book contains the words of Cegorach himself, and written within a certain passage is a prediction of a new future path that completely circumvents the inevitable destruction of the universe by the Chaos Gods, an event the Eldar refer to as Rana Dandra. The Laughing God uses his followers, and very specific entities known as Shadow Seers, to make sure certain events happen at certain times in very specific ways. They view the entire galaxy as a stage, and each and every living creature as an actor in the grand performance. By making sure certain events come to pass, they thus will manifest Cegorach's alternative future into existence. He's one of the most intentionally mysterious and cryptic characters in the entirety of 40K lore, but his influence can be felt in just about every major pivotal event over the last couple thousand years. For example, even though Yvraine and the Eldar God of the Dead are often credited with the resurrection of Guilliman, it was actually one of his Shadow Seers that pushed Belisarius Cawl to continue his research into the Cadian pylons, which not only gave Cadia a fighting chance against the Despoiler's incursion, but would also lead him to the discovery of certain minerals that would eventually be used in the Armor of Fate, the suit of armor that was used in Guilliman's resurrection. Not to mention, some believe that Cegorach was directly responsible for Ynnead's resurrection in the first place,
would be all
but
about.
We'll get into that in another video. Number 9. The C'tan. The C'tan were known to be ancient and frighteningly powerful star gods, created at the beginning of time out of the fundamental energies of the universe. They were incorporeal and formless beings whose appetite was so insatiable that they literally drained the life from the stars they encountered by wrapping themselves entirely around them and snuffing them out of existence. This would plunge all of the life-bearing worlds in the surrounding systems into complete and total darkness, confining all of the living species that dwelt there to the halls of extinction. These ancient creatures would end up forming an alliance with the Necron Tyr in a war against their hated rivals, the Old Ones. It was the C'tan that tricked their allies into throwing themselves into the Great Furnaces, causing them to shed their bodies of flesh to instead exist as an engram copy of consciousness within a living metal form. Together they would war against the Old Ones and their creations, in a war that spanned the entirety of the Milky Way, and was known as the War in Heaven. They had, however, deceived their allies, and when the Necron Tyr shed their bodies of flesh, the C'tan would gorge themselves on their souls. This would result in them becoming ascended, and reaching even more insane and terrifying heights of power. At their peak, they were said to be able to raise entire worlds with a single glance, and extinguish entire systems by summoning forth reality-warping black holes. However, despite their truly awe-inspiring power, their own hubris would end up being their downfall. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, it was actually the Laughing God of the Eldari that slowly manipulated the C'tan against one another. They would end up feeding on each other until only 5 were left: the Flayer, the Deceiver, the Nightbringer, the Void Dragon, and the Outsider. The Necrons would eventually turn on their would-be god.
Interesting. I didn't know there was only 5. That's pretty interesting. But in the end, didn't work out well for the Catan. What did Major Kill say? They blasted him and threw him into the, stasis fields like Pokemon?
And the Maynard dynasty would destroy the Flayer outright. The Void Dragon would end up wounded and flee to Earth in order to prey on humanity. It was ultimately defeated by the Emperor and imprisoned upon Mars. The Nightbringer and the Deceiver would end up shattered, and the Outsider, said to be the most powerful of all of them, would end up being driven into insanity by the lingering bits of consciousness in its mind of all of the other Catan it had consumed. The voices eventually caused it to flee our galaxy in a self-imposed exile. Not much is known about it past this, so it's difficult to quantify its abilities. That being said, it is believed that the Outsider is the only living intact Catan, and if the mad star god was to ever return to the Milky Way, it would be an apocalyptic level threat. When it comes to figuring out just how strong the Catan are, we can look to their shards. The shards themselves are the only thing that remains of the Catan after they were enslaved and shattered by the Necrons. These are some of the most powerful weapons and energy sources that the Necrons have at their disposal, and are unleashed upon the battlefield when they encounter a particularly stubborn enemy that refuses to yield before Necron superiority. Despite the fact that they exist in a fractured state, each one is said to be a being of near unlimited power, manifesting energy blasts made of pure antimatter, dominating the minds of...
So the shards are kind of like, I guess, equal to, in a way, like the Avatar Khaine, right?
Lesser beings in their vicinity, manipulating the flow of time, and even banishing those that stand before them to alternate realities. The 8th edition Necron Codex tells us that their power is limited only by their immense and terrifying imaginations. The Catan shards of the Nightbringer are said to be some of the most powerful the Necrons have access to, which makes sense, as the Nightbringer was the incarnation of death itself, a creature that delighted in inflicting pain and suffering, and was said to be the one that introduced the emotion of fear to the physical universe. It destroyed entire star systems on a whim, and gorged itself on the agony it inflicted on countless billions. It's generally believed by the Warhammer community that at the apex of their power, the Catan were easily the most powerful beings to have ever existed solely in the physical universe, and many assume they were the equal to the Chaos Gods, albeit the physical universe's version of them. However, this belief exists solely in the realm of speculation. As far as I'm aware, there is no actual source that states this to be true, or gives us a real actual grasp on just how ludicrously powerful they actually were. It's unfortunately one of those things that's just left up to our imagination. Now, if we were to take the absolutely ridiculous power of a single Catan shard and magnify it by 1,000 to get an idea of just how powerful a fully powered Catan actually was, the result is admittedly pretty horrifying. These would be entities that could destroy entire systems or vast sections of space with a snap of their fingers. But as it stands, this is still all just speculative. We don't know how many individual shards of each Catan exist. It could be a few dozen or thousands. Though due to just how big of a deal each one is made out to be, it's likely that they are relatively rare. We also have to bear in mind that the Catan were ultimately defeated and enslaved by the Necrons, a species that is definitely insanely powerful, not to take anything away from the Necrons. But despite that, the shattering of the Catan is a factual example of a mortal race killing or enslaving gods. That is to say, a similar occurrence has never occurred with the Chaos Gods. Such an idea is pretty much unthinkable. So because of this, despite how powerful the Catan are, they just aren't quite on the same level as the Chaos Gods.
Right, because I mean,
Number 8, Khaine.
Destroyed by a mortal race.
Also known as Khaine or Khaine the Bloody-Handed, is the bloodthirsty Eldari god of war, wrath, and destruction. During the War in Heaven, Khaine would end up in a battle with the Nightbringer, where he subsequently defeated it, shattered its necrodermis body, and, adding further insult to injury, hurled its scythe into the warp. So, in a sense, Khaine was able to defeat the figurative and semi-literal embodiment of death itself. This fight would, however, have major consequences for Khaine, as the shattered body of the Catan exploded into a storm of shards, many of them piercing its flesh, and forever tainting Khaine's body with its essence. Since Khaine is a mythological figure, other than this fight with the Nightbringer, we don't get a lot of insight into just how powerful they actually are, so instead, we will turn to the avatars of Khaine. which exist as a sliver of his true power. An avatar of Khaine is a fiery
like
manifestation of Khaine's wrath,
of the
an entity that towers over the battlefield and can cleave armored vehicles in half with a single swing of their sword. They leave a burning trail of destruction in their wake wherever they go, and are constantly surrounded by a swirling inferno that causes everything in their vicinity to burst into flames. Much like how the god they are an aspect of was known for its unquenchable thirst for battle, the Avatar will not rest until all of the enemies of the Eldari and all of their fortifications are left as nothing more than smoldering ruins. The carnage the Avatars can inflict is absolutely legendary, despite the fact that many 40K authors have unfortunately disrespected them by using them as a simple plot device to show off just how strong their main characters are. Regardless of this plot-based nonsense, the reality is these monstrosities are some of the most powerful weapons the Eldar have access to, each and every one existing as only a sliver of Khaine's full, unfractured power. The fact that Khaine was able to kill the Nightbringer in its full, unshattered form is an absolutely remarkable feat, and is why impressive. He ranks above the Catan in the list. However, Khaine himself would in fact be defeated by a different god, and in a twist of fate similar to that of the Catan, would end up shattered into thousands of fragments.
Who defeated
Number 7, Slaanesh. Slaanesh, also known as the Dark Prince or She Who Thirsts, is the chaos god of excess, hedonism, debauchery, and all things kinky and depraved. Every single sentient creature, no matter how stoic, is not completely free from desire, whether it be physical, mental, or spiritual. We all have needs and wants that we wish to see fulfilled.
Fair point.
Likewise, these desires exist upon a precipice, and if pushed too far, can descend into full-blown obsession, that which She Who Thirsts feeds upon. Desire can come in infinite forms. It could be something humble, like a starving laborer that desires nothing more than food for their family. Something a bit more ego-driven, like a politician's lust for power. Or, on the depraved end of the spectrum, the sadistic killer's inclination to inflict pain. Whenever a mortal gives in to temptation of any form, they are unknowingly courting Slaanesh. The act of giving in pushes them further along a dark path towards depravity and insanity. Slaanesh will then guide the individual to seek out ever more heightening extremes, eventually leaving them as an addict that can only experience pleasure through the darkest and most sadistic of actions. Slaanesh watches from their dark realm in utter delight as the galaxy descends further into debauchery. They view mortals as nothing more than playthings, toys that were designed to be poked, prodded, and manipulated. Slaanesh is the youngest of the 4 gods, and thus is generally viewed as the weakest, although this description can be misleading. Slaanesh's power is far more subtle and manipulative than, say, the raw strength of Khorne or the voracious diseases of Nurgle. Their demons, likewise, are primarily designed to invoke the desperate and hedonistic desires of mortal hearts. They are entities formed of contradiction, jarringly graceful and repugnantly beautiful, enchanting yet ultimately horrifying. Much like how Slaanesh themselves is said to be so disarmingly beautiful and alluring that no mortal can look upon them without instantly losing their soul. Slaanesh was born from the rampant degeneracy that had come to infect Eldar society after the War in Heaven. The depraved energy the species generated gestated in the warp before finally reaching a breaking point, which gave birth to a new chaos god. The resulting birth scream literally ripped a hole in reality, and the resulting shockwave killed each and every Eldar on every world for hundreds of light years. The terrible wound in reality where the 2 universes now overlap is what we know today as the Eye of Terror. Immediately after their birth, Slaanesh would go on an absolute murderous rampage and would kill all of the gods of the Eldar pantheon, with the exception of Isha, Khaine, and Cegorach. So despite how ridiculously powerful each of them were, they were nothing in comparison to She Who Thirsts, who systematically slaughtered each and every one of them, without taking a rest between each kill. Cegorach managed to escape into the webway, whereas Isha was spared by Slaanesh but then ultimately kidnapped by Nurgle. Khaine would be the last one on Slaanesh's hit list, but even against a god who had just battled multiple other deities, he was no match for the Dark Prince and ended up shattered into thousands of shards.
So
I'll point out that being the weakest
Khaine.
of the 4 Chaos gods is kind of like being the weakest heavyweight champion of the world. Yeah, some other title holder would probably beat them if they both fought during their prime, but against the rest of us normies, it would be an absolute slaughter. It's also important to note that when we talk about the Chaos Gods and just how powerful they are, the lore states that at one point each and every one of them was the most powerful. With Slaanesh, it definitely would have been right after their birth. Because of this, I'm going to be ordering the Chaos Gods where they fall in the hierarchy as of the 42nd millennium.
Oh, okay.
Number 6, Nurgle.
Papa Nurgle.
The grandfather, lord of plagues and disease, is the god of the cycle of life and death, entropy, rot, decay, and pestilence. He stands apart from the other gods that, in his own, albeit disturbing way, is the only one of the pantheon that genuinely cares for his followers. He views each and every one of them as his beloved children, and bestows upon them ever more generous blessings in the form of new supernatural diseases, demonic parasites, and all forms of sickening mutation. Every pox, boil, blister, and sore is viewed by those who worship him as a sign of his love. He is the embodiment of the fear of death, shared by all sentient creatures, perhaps the first fear to have ever existed in this universe. But despite this, he teaches his followers that life and death, growth and decay, are all part of the same cycle, one that cannot change. He tells them to not fight against this cycle, but to embrace it, to embrace the despair of death. He teaches that entropy is the one unchanging truth of the universe. All things have a beginning and an end. Every life will end. Every civilization will rise and fall. Every tower will eventually crumble, and every disease will eventually run its course. He is the mastermind behind every virus, disease, and plague that has ever existed in the mortal universe, or even these supernatural diseases of the soul that emanate from the immaterium. Much like the Great Cycle, or perhaps more accurately, like the proliferation and subsequent remission of a disease, so too does Nurgle's power wax and wane. There were moments in time where plague runs rampant across the galaxy, and Nurgle's power is at its apex, surpassing all of the other gods and becoming a truly unstoppable force. It is, however, inevitable that his power will wane again, and he will be relegated to a relatively weak point in the pantheon. As a result, these power spikes are vastly more predictable than those of his siblings. Despite their disturbing appearance, the warriors that have pledged themselves to his service are incredibly resilient, and many of whom can suffer multiple mortal wounds and keep marching forward as if nothing happened. Blades get caught in rancid rolls of diseased blubber, and bolter shells are absorbed and rusted to dust inside of their bodies. It is as if the cycle has simply paused for them, their bodies displaying the telltale signs of rot and disease, yet they are seemingly immune to its effects. They cannot die by natural means and are completely immune to pain. Before we dive any deeper, here's a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and allows you to play as more than 2,000 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships in dynamic combined arms PvP battles. Every single vehicle in this game is incredibly detailed and modeled down to their individual components, creating an insanely immersive combat experience.
So
the game's collection of vehicles is frankly
pretty right on my list.
And
some
spans
of them.
over 100 years of development from the 1920s
even
all
though I
the way
said
up
the
to the
Avatar
present
Khaine
day.
still
War Thunder features an in-depth customization
the Chaos Gods,
that allows
so we
you to
split
fully
them up.
customize all of the game's vehicles with hundreds of different
I didn't think of
camouflages,
the Catan.
historical markings, and 3D decorators such as bushes
powerful,
and equipment
but
to make all of the war machines distinctly yours. All of which are
getting
rendered in
destroyed by
beautiful
a
4K resolution.
mortal
My favorite
race,
part about this game is just how realistic the combat is. There's no hit points
still
in the
powerful,
game. Every
but
one of the vehicles has a bunch of components and a crew.
to get killed
When
by
those take
a
a critical hit, the vehicle can suffer a
mortal
wide
race.
array of different effects, one of which being exploding in spectacular detail. War Thunder is available on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and the previous console generation. Click on the link in the description of this video to download the game for free today and receive a huge bonus pack including multiple premium vehicles, a premium account trial, boosters, and a whole lot more. Big thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video.
Locked up on Mars.
Number 5. Gork and Mork.
Oh.
Despite the previous couple of entries on this list, I'm sure you were expecting another Chaos God here. But that is in fact incorrect, my friend. It's Gork and Mork, the gods of the orcs. Almost all of the lore we have about them comes from the orcs themselves. They say they are the biggest and toughest gods. One is brutally cunning, and the other is cunningly brutal. Mork is clever enough to wait for you to have your back turned before hitting you twice as hard. Whereas Gork will hit you regular-like, but then when you turn to face him, he'll punch you twice as hard. Because of this, it is common for orcs to have a favorite of the two gods. Gork represents the pure aggressive nature of the orcs, and is more preferred by boys, knobs, and any straightforward orc fighter. Whereas Mork's cunningness makes him the preferred deity of the more esoteric orc units, like Weird Boys, Commandos, and Mech Boys to name a few. But at the end of the day, they're mostly interchangeable, and I think the orcs forget there's a difference pretty often. When it comes to measuring their power, we have to get a little bit speculative. Warp entities like the gods get their power from collective belief and emotion. Take for example Slaanesh, they get their power from excess. So the more people pray to Slaanesh, and the more there's an abundance of hedonism and debauchery in the galaxy, the stronger they become. The orcs have a presence in the warp just like every other living creature, and they are so unbelievably simple in nature that their gods don't have these grand mythologies with all this overlapping lore that tends to contradict itself. No, nothing like that. The orcs think their gods are the best, and thus they're the best. It's beautifully simple. So we have to then assume that this belief in their god's defining feature, being that they're bigger and tougher and stronger than every other god, would in fact begin to manifest. Consider how powerful the Eldar gods were when worshipped exclusively by the Eldari. The orcs are the most numerous species in the entire Milky Way, outnumbering something like humanity 100 if not 1,000 to 1. It makes sense if you think about it, but as is orc tradition, it makes even more sense if you don't think too hard about it. And speaking of their mythology, we actually have a pretty good example of a legend about Gork and Mork that demonstrates they were at least strong enough to defeat one of the Chaos Gods.
Right,
really?
So one day, Gork and Mork went looking for a gigantic squiggly beast, and they find it at the bottom of a huge cesspit. And also at the bottom of that cesspit was Nurgle, who had eaten all the snotlings. And Gork and Mork clobbered Nurgle so hard, he spewed up all the snotlings that were still alive. Nurgle shrank and became a squiggly beast. The snotlings then turned that squig into a feast for Gork and Mork.
This myth clearly represents the orcs' triumph over Nurgle. The orcs have no fear of the realms of Nurgle and thus happily thrive on squiggly beasts that breed in their cesspits. Despite this story, we don't see a lot of evidence of them fighting against the Chaos Gods in the lore. Gork and Mork are not sending incursions of orc demons into real space, nor are their blessed followers turning into the equivalent of demon princes. But now that I think about it, that would actually be pretty awesome. However, from what I've read, all of this would certainly be possible. Gork and Mork really could be the strongest of the gods and can wipe the rest of them out. They are, however, too busy fighting themselves in the warp. That's all they've done since the dawn of the orcs, is just beat the crap out of each other. So if you want my personal, definitely unbiased opinion, Gork and Mork are definitely the strongest. But for the sake of trying to be as accurate as possible with my videos and not just throw out the dozens of hours of research I've put into each and every one of them, I have to rank them in the purely speculative realm. Also, some dude on Twitter theorized that Gork and Mork are just Khorne and Tzeentch, but they painted themselves green and whipped the orcs up into a frenzy. That's neither here nor there, and it's definitely not canon, but this is my video and it made me laugh, so I'm including it. Number 4. Tzeentch. Tzeentch, also known as the Changer of Ways or the Architect of Fate, is the chaos god of sorcery, knowledge, mutation, destiny, lies, and trickery. He is directly empowered by every mortal race through their desire to plot and deceive. All those who act deceptively or would pursue knowledge and understanding with a desire to ultimately manipulate the world around them inevitably draw the attention of Tzeentch. Every living creature exists in a state of mutability. We are all constantly changing in a million different ways, and not always readily apparent. From the grand and more obvious, like an advancement in rank within our society, down to the microscopic level of cellular division. As mortal beings, we are ultimately malleable. And that malleability has drawn the eyes of the Changer of Ways upon mankind. There are 1,001 ways in which an individual can come to worshiping Tzeentch, but in almost all of these cases, they involve a desire for change, whether that be through their own ambitions, a desire to escape their figurative or literal bonds that shackle them to a miserable existence, or in some instances, a desire for unbridled power. Because of this, Tzeentch often attracts would-be practitioners of the dark arts. His demons whisper forbidden secrets into the minds of mortals, telling them truths of the universe too impossible to be believed, yet ultimately impossible to ignore. The individual will then seek out answers to questions no mortal was ever meant to ask, and will ultimately find themselves as one of his faithful. The promise of power proving to be too intoxicating for mortals to resist. Across cultures, all of the gods have been depicted in a lot of different ways, but most often with several identifiable themes present in all of them. Tzeentch is the exception, and due to his nature as the incarnation of change without limits, this would make sense. He has been depicted as a twinkling constellation of blinking eyes, as a being of illuminating warp flame, an elaborate and intricate puppeteer that pulls on the infinite strands of fate. And most commonly in the 40K community, a giant blue squid monster. All magic, sorcery, and psychic abilities can trace their origin back to the Immaterium, and thus to Tzeentch, the master of magic in all its forms. He is able to perceive every event that has ever occurred across space and time, while also being able to see the strands of fate that lead to every potential future simultaneously. Trying to directly measure his intelligence with numbers is kinda meaningless, but to simplify it, this is an entity that would measure his IQ in the quintillions. He has plans within plans within plans, and the most mundane of events may set in motion a web of compounding instances that may not bear fruit for thousands of years, but will ultimately secure him
But he has a plan for it.
Yet this impossibly complex web of plans spreads so incomprehensibly wide over all of reality that it touches every living thing at one point or another, whether or not the individual realizes it or not. He perceives every event, intention, idea, thought, and whispered prayer of every mortal, and his impossibly complex mind is able to work out just how every single one of these will potentially impact the future. He watches over every sentient creature within the mortal universe with great enthusiasm, watching as each of his plots and schemes slowly begin to unfold into history. Tzeentch favors the cunning and intelligent over the physically strong, and thus rewards his followers with insight into the future and access to forbidden lore. He is ludicrously strong, but at one point was said to be even stronger. So strong, in fact, that the gods did the impossible. They set aside their differences to team up against him in order to bring him back down to their level.
Really?
This was ultimately successful, but according to the Great Deceiver, was all part of his plan. Some believe that if Tzeentch truly willed it, he would end the Great Game and achieve dominance over the rest of the Pantheon. But due to his complicated and enthusiastic nature for the Great Game itself, he never would, and most likely is incapable of doing so. Based on Tzeentch's nature, I don't think he personally has the ability to win. The compulsion to keep the game going is just too ingrained in him, meaning doing anything that would end the game is actually an impossibility. Number 3.
Okay, so this is where I'm going to call it for part 1. Perfect time. The Emperor. So yeah, well, that went way further than I thought. I was going to stop at 5, but yeah, video was shorter than I thought. I was trying to go for the half and half mark, the 25 minutes. But yeah, so we had Cegorach. Forgot all about him, the Khaine. So it's basically all gods. That's pretty much what it is. So yeah, all gods in this video here. Hopefully he does a video talking about the 10 most powerful characters, not gods, because you know, he split them up. You know, we've already got Slaanesh, we've done Nurgle, we've done Tzeentch, so Khorne's going to be down there somewhere. So we got the Emperor, Khorne, and I don't know what the last one would be. But yeah, so, you know, the list is already like halfway done when I said the forecast gods and the Emperor. So there was 5. I just didn't think of, you know, the Khaine, Cegorach, and Gork and Mork, which are pretty funny, not gonna lie. But yeah, that was very cool learning about all their different, I guess, feats of strength and stuff like that. You know, Slaanesh getting so powerful that all the other Chaos Gods teamed up and stuff like that to take it down or knock it down a couple of pegs. You know, how powerful Khaine is, you know, defeating the Nightbringer and stuff like that, which, I don't know, there's like some things like, yeah, the Khaine, like, powerful, but like, not, like, you know, they got their ass handed to them by, you know, Necrons, a mortal race, if you will. I mean, you know, despite, you know, can probably like snap their fingers and be like, oh, poof, you know, this solar system's gone, you know. Well, you just got your asses handed to you by a mortal race where, what, look at Khorne, you know, what, Skarbrand in all his fury, might, and strength, you know, swinging his axe, put like a little dink right into Khorne's armor. Like, one of his most powerful bloodthirsters used all of his strength and fury and rage, put a little dink in his armor. Fuck out of here. So I mean, it's kind of interesting how powerful and yet weak the Khaine can be. But yeah, that was a very interesting list and stuff like that. Very cool, you know, seeing just how powerful, well, the gods can be. So in part 2, it's going to be, yeah, the Emperor, apparently Khorne, and whatever number 1 is. The old ones, I'm guessing. I'm going to stick with the old ones, I guess, you know, since they created 2 whole races and stuff. Yeah, that's my guess. Well, I just don't know who number 1 is. Obviously, we got the Emperor and Khorne left, and number 1, mystery. But yeah, hopefully he does another video and talks about non-god characters, because that would be very interesting to see who are the top 10 most powerful non-god characters are. That would be very cool. But yeah, so there we go. There is part 1. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. That'd be awesome. Remember, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Follow me on social media. Links in the description box below. Come join me over on Discord. We can talk more 40K and stuff like that. Suggest videos for me to watch and stuff. And we can just, you know, talk more instead of right here in the comment section and stuff like that. So, yeah, other than that, just stick around. Part 2 is on its way. And other than that, I will see you guys next time.